Imagine living in a world where everything around you, society, expectations, and even the values you've been taught to hold dear, starts to feel like a prison. A world where your instincts, desires, and even your true identity are shackled by the rules and norms of others. Sounds suffocating, right? Now, picture a life where you could break free from these constraints and become the person you were always meant to be, where your actions, beliefs, and choices are entirely your own. What if you could live a life that reflects who you truly are, without the pressure to conform to societal standards or compromise your values? Welcome to the world of Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher who challenged the very foundations of society, morality, and what it means to live a free life. Nietzsche's ideas about the self and freedom aren't just abstract concepts, they offer a radical blueprint for how to live authentically and assert your individuality in a world that constantly demands conformity. In today's video, we're diving deep into the heart of Nietzsche's philosophy, exploring how you can break free from the societal chains that hold you back and create a life that is uniquely yours. We'll be discussing the power of self-creation, how to navigate the tension between nature and civilization, and why suffering, while often seen as negative, is actually a crucial part of your personal evolution. But this isn't just about theory, this is about real-world application. How do you actually take Nietzsche's philosophy and use it to reshape your life? How do you confront societal expectations, embrace your true desires, and live with the power and freedom that Nietzsche describes? Stick with me as we unpack these life-changing ideas and start the journey toward a life that's fully authentic, empowered, and unapologetically your own. Before we dive in, make sure to hit the like button if you're already intrigued. Share this video with anyone who's looking to break free from society's grip. And subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into philosophy that can change the way you live. Also, if you find this content valuable and want to support the channel, don't forget to hit that super thanks button below. Your support helps keep this content coming. Let's jump into Nietzsche's world and discover what true freedom really looks like. The question of whether one can truly live as their authentic self in a world that demands conformity is a compelling dilemma. Can we, as individuals, genuinely be ourselves? Or are we forever bound by the expectations of society? How do we navigate a world in which nearly every aspect of our lives is dictated by external forces, rules, norms, expectations? How do we break free from these invisible chains and become the fullest, most genuine version of ourselves? This challenge is at the heart of Friedrich Nietzsche's philosophy, especially his exploration of the self and freedom. Friedrich Nietzsche, a philosopher who revolutionized Western thought, is often known for his bold ideas about the human condition. His works challenge the foundations of morality, culture, and individual existence. Nietzsche was deeply concerned with the state of the individual in modern society, particularly the ways in which civilization, with its societal structures and moral codes, stifled the potential of human beings. Central to Nietzsche's work is the idea that true freedom and fulfillment can only be achieved by transcending the limitations placed upon us by society, by creating our own values and forging our own paths. His ideas are not just theoretical, they have powerful implications for how we live our lives today. At the core of Nietzsche's philosophy is the concept of the self, the idea that we are not simply products of external circumstances, but that we have the capacity to shape our own identities and destinies. Nietzsche believed that society, with its rigid structures and moral expectations, forces us into molds that diminish our uniqueness and potential. To Nietzsche, the quest for personal freedom is a journey of self-creation, of forging an identity free from the constraints of conventional morality and societal norms. The self, in Nietzsche's view, is not a static entity but a dynamic, ever-evolving process, a project of continual growth and transformation. For Nietzsche, freedom does not simply mean the absence of external constraints. True freedom is the ability to act according to one's own will, to express one's inner desires and instincts without fear of judgment or repression. This kind of freedom is not a passive state, it requires strength, courage, and a willingness to face discomfort and challenge societal norms. Nietzsche's ideal individual is someone who rejects the herd mentality, who steps outside the conventional boundaries set by culture, and who dares to create their own values. This is where his famous concept of the Ubermensch, or Overman, comes into play, the individual who has transcended the limitations imposed by society and fully embraced their own unique potential. Nietzsche's ideas about the self and freedom were not just philosophical abstractions but a call to action, a challenge to live more authentically in a world that often discourages individualism and creativity. As we explore the tension between society's constraints and the individual's desire for self-expression and freedom, we can begin to see how Nietzsche's philosophy offers a radical, transformative path for reclaiming our true selves and living with greater purpose and autonomy. In this discussion, we will dive into Nietzsche's views on the nature of the self, the ways in which society limits individual freedom, and how we might overcome these limitations to live more fully and authentically. Through this journey, we will examine how Nietzsche's philosophy offers not only a critique of contemporary society but a bold vision for human flourishing, one that invites each of us to challenge the status quo and become the creators of our own existence. Friedrich Nietzsche's concept of the self challenges conventional understandings of identity, offering a radical departure from traditional views of what it means to be an individual. Unlike many philosophers who view the self as a fixed entity, Nietzsche believed that the self is not a static thing but rather an evolving process, constantly changing and developing. In Nietzsche's view, the self is not something we simply possess, it is something we create. And its creation is an ongoing journey. This idea fundamentally alters the way we think about identity and personal growth, inviting us to embrace the fluid, dynamic nature of who we are. For Nietzsche, the self is a project of continual transformation. It is not a static point of being but rather an unfolding process of self-overcoming. Rather than adhering to a fixed set of characteristics or qualities, the self in Nietzsche's philosophy is always in flux, shaped by the choices we make, the struggles we face, and the values we create for ourselves. Nietzsche's notion of the self stands in stark contrast to the traditional views that place emphasis on inherent, unchanging characteristics that define who we are. The self is not something that is determined by society, biology, or any other external force. Instead, it is something we actively shape through our will to power the force within us that drives us to grow, overcome challenges, and assert our existence in the world. This fluidity of the self also means that it cannot be confined by the rigid boundaries set by society, moral codes, or cultural norms. Nietzsche was deeply critical of societal forces that sought to impose fixed identities on individuals. Traditional morality, particularly the Christian morality that was so dominant in Nietzsche's time, placed strict limitations on human behavior and desires, often suppressing the natural instincts that are essential to individual development. These moral codes, Nietzsche argued, encouraged individuals to repress their true selves in favor of conformity, self-sacrifice, and submission to societal authority. Nietzsche saw this as a profound problem because it hindered personal growth and self-expression. The moral systems imposed by society were often based on values that went against the natural instincts and desires of the individual. These values told people that they should prioritize the well-being of others over their own, that they should suppress their desires and instincts in order to conform to the norms of society, and that the pursuit of individual happiness was selfish and wrong. In Nietzsche's view, such morality stifled the development of the self by forcing individuals to subdue their natural instincts and desires in favor of ideals that were not their own. Instead, Nietzsche believed that individuals must strive to break free from these constraints and reclaim their true selves. This process of self-liberation involves questioning the values and norms that society has imposed upon us and rejecting those that prevent us from living authentically. The self, according to Nietzsche, is not defined by external labels, social roles, or inherited beliefs. It is defined by the individual's ability to create their own values and live according to their own will. The development of the self is also closely tied to the concept of self-awareness. Nietzsche believed that true personal growth can only occur when we fully understand who we are, when we recognize our instincts, desires, and capacities, and when we become aware of the ways in which society has shaped us. Self-awareness is the key to breaking free from the influence of societal norms and moral codes, because it allows us to see where we have been conditioned to conform and where we can choose to assert our true selves. Nietzsche was a strong advocate of introspection and self-reflection, believing that individuals must look deeply within themselves to uncover their true desires and motivations. Only by understanding ourselves fully can we begin to create a life that is truly our own. In his philosophy, Nietzsche emphasized the importance of struggle and conflict in the development of the self. Personal growth, for Nietzsche, is not a smooth or easy process. It involves facing challenges, confronting adversity, and overcoming obstacles both external and internal. The self is forged in the fire of struggle, and it is through this struggle that we gain strength, resilience, and a deeper understanding of who we truly are. Nietzsche's concept of self-creation is rooted in the idea of will to power, which is the fundamental drive within each of us to assert ourselves and shape our own existence. Self-affirmation, for Nietzsche, is a process that requires effort and persistence. The individual must fight against the forces that seek to limit them, whether these forces come from society, culture, or internal fears and doubts. The struggle for self-affirmation is a continual process of growth, where the individual learns to embrace their desires and instincts, rejects societal constraints, and creates a life that is true to their inner essence. Nietzsche believed that the most powerful individuals are those who are able to transcend the limitations placed on them by society and who actively shape their own destinies through their will to power. One way to understand Nietzsche's view of the self is to think about it as a kind of art. Just as an artist creates a painting or sculpture, the individual creates themselves through the choices they make and the actions they take. The self is not something that is simply given to us, it is something we actively construct. And like any great work of art, the self is unique, dynamic, and full of potential. The process of creating the self involves constant experimentation, growth, and redefinition. It is a process that requires courage, creativity, and the willingness to challenge the status quo. To make this more tangible, let's consider an example from the modern world. Take someone like Elon Musk, the entrepreneur behind companies like SpaceX and Tesla. Musk has never been content to simply fit into existing societal roles or follow conventional paths. He has constantly challenged the status quo, reinvented industries, and pushed the boundaries of what is possible. Musk's success is not just a result of his intelligence or work ethic, it is a product of his ability to create his own identity and shape his own path. Musk embodies Nietzsche's ideal of self-creation. He has embraced his instincts, his passions, and his will to power. And he has used these qualities to create a life that reflects his true self. Regardless of societal expectations, the key takeaway from Nietzsche's view of the self is that we are not bound by the identities that society imposes on us. Rather, the self is something we must continually create, redefine, and affirm through our actions, our choices, and our will. The self is a dynamic, evolving process, one that can never be fully defined by external labels or fixed categories. To truly live as ourselves, we must reject the limitations placed upon us by society, embrace our natural instincts and desires, and create our own path in life. This process of self-creation is what allows us to experience true freedom and personal fulfillment. Nietzsche's ideas about the self challenge us to reconsider how we view identity and personal growth. Instead of accepting fixed, external definitions of who we are, Nietzsche calls us to look inward, to explore our true desires, and to create a life that is authentic and meaningful. The self is not a finished product, it is a work in progress, constantly evolving and growing as we continue to face new challenges and assert our will to power. This is the path to personal greatness and true freedom, and it is a path that each of us must walk for ourselves. Friedrich Nietzsche's critique of modern society, especially in relation to the concept of the self, is one of the most profound aspects of his philosophy. Nietzsche argued that modern civilization places excessive importance on collective values, often at the expense of the individual's ability to assert and realize their own personal identity. In this framework, society's norms, expectations, and moral codes serve as a constraint on the individual, stifling the very essence of what it means to be truly free and authentically oneself. Nietzsche's perspective on the relationship between the self and society is not just a theoretical exercise, it is a sharp critique of the mechanisms that, in his view, inhibit personal growth and self-actualization. In Nietzsche's vision, society functions as a powerful force that imposes conformity upon its members, often discouraging individuality and personal development. He believed that modern society, with its emphasis on tradition, obedience, and adherence to established moral norms, tends to promote mediocrity and passivity rather than encouraging people to cultivate their unique potential. Society demands that individuals adhere to a shared set of values, many of which, according to Nietzsche, are life-denying and suppress the natural instincts that are central to personal growth. These societal pressures create a dynamic where individuals are forced to suppress their desires and instincts in order to fit into predefined roles, undermining the very foundation of individual freedom. Nietzsche's critique is particularly evident when he discusses the concept of the herd mentality, a term he uses to describe the conformity that modern societies often encourage. In this sense, people become more focused on fitting in and meeting the expectations of others than on cultivating their own unique identity. For Nietzsche, the herd mentality is one of the greatest threats to the development of the individual, as it forces people to sacrifice their uniqueness for the sake of social acceptance. The individual's true potential is often lost in the desire to blend in with the crowd, to follow societal conventions, and to meet the standards set by others. This brings us to Nietzsche's concept of the Ubermensch, or Overman, a figure who transcends the limitations imposed by both society and traditional morality. The Übermensch represents the ideal of the self who has overcome the constraints of societal expectations and moral codes to create their own values and live according to their own will. Nietzsche's Ubermensch is not someone who simply rebels against society for the sake of rebellion, rather, it is an individual who creates a life that is fully their own. Grounded in their own instincts, desires, and personal vision, the Übermensch stands as a model for what it means to live authentically and to fully embrace one's own unique potential. The idea of the Übermensch is not about rejecting society entirely, rather, it is about transcending its limiting aspects. Nietzsche did not advocate for a complete abandonment of civilization or social structures. Instead, he envisioned a world in which individuals could live within society but not be constrained by its norms and values. The Übermensch is an individual who embraces their personal power, creates their own meaning in life, and rejects the oppressive forces of tradition and social conformity. In Nietzsche's view, society often encourages a false sense of security and stability, but these qualities come at the cost of individual freedom and self-expression. The Übermensch is someone who rises above this, embodying the freedom to create and shape their own destiny. One of the key aspects of Nietzsche's philosophy is the idea that society's moral systems and religious values have the effect of suppressing the natural, life-affirming instincts of the individual. Nietzsche criticized traditional morality, especially the Christian values that had dominated Western society for centuries, for promoting virtues such as meekness, humility, and self-sacrifice. These values, Nietzsche argued, are contrary to the natural instincts of strength, creativity, and self-assertion. He believed that the emphasis on humility and self-denial, often promoted by religious and social institutions, created a slave morality that stifled the development of the individual and encouraged passivity and weakness. Nietzsche's vision of the Übermensch is, in part, a rejection of this slave morality in favor of a life-affirming morality that celebrates strength, power, and self-creation. The relationship between the self and society is also shaped by the societal structures that regulate and control individual behavior. For Nietzsche, these structures ranging from political institutions to social hierarchies are designed to maintain the status quo and suppress the emergence of individuals who challenge these norms. Modern social structures, in Nietzsche's view, function as systems of control that reinforce the collective values of society, often at the expense of individual freedom and creativity. These structures, which prioritize order, stability, and conformity, discourage individuals from pursuing their unique desires and ambitions. The result is a society in which people are less likely to question established norms or to seek personal fulfillment outside of conventional paths. For Nietzsche, the most profound form of freedom comes not from external conditions but from within. The true self, according to Nietzsche, is created through the process of self-overcoming by rejecting societal constraints and asserting one's own will to power. Self-creation is the key to achieving freedom, as it allows the individual to transcend the limitations imposed by society and live in a way that reflects their authentic desires and values. This process of self-overcoming involves the courage to confront the discomfort and struggle that come with challenging social expectations and creating one's own identity. Nietzsche did not see this as an easy path, but rather as a transformative journey that requires strength, resilience, and a willingness to face adversity. In the context of modern society, the pressure to conform is stronger than ever. With the rise of social media, corporate culture, and the increasing influence of globalized standards of success, it is easy for individuals to feel like they must adhere to predefined paths in order to succeed. In this sense, modern society often promotes the values of conformity and mediocrity, prioritizing safety and predictability over creativity and self-expression. The societal emphasis on success in the form of wealth, status, and material achievement often leaves little room for individuals to explore their true passions or to create their own unique path in life. Nietzsche's philosophy challenges this by encouraging individuals to reject these external standards and to focus instead on the process of self-creation, which involves living according to one's own values and pursuing personal fulfillment. The key to breaking free from society's constraints is self-awareness. Nietzsche believed that individuals must first recognize the ways in which they have been conditioned by society in order to transcend these influences. This self-awareness allows individuals to identify and reject the values that have been imposed upon them, and to create their own path forward. For Nietzsche, self-awareness is not simply an intellectual exercise. It is a transformative process that allows individuals to gain control over their lives and to live authentically. In contemporary society, many people feel trapped by the expectations of others and the pressures of social norms. Whether it's the expectations placed on us by family, education, or the media, these external pressures often dictate how we should think, behave, and live. Nietzsche's critique of society urges us to break free from these external influences and to take control of our own lives. This requires courage, the courage to face the uncertainty and discomfort that come with rejecting societal norms and creating our own values. Ultimately, Nietzsche's philosophy calls for a radical rethinking of the relationship between the self and society. Rather than conforming to societal expectations or living according to the values imposed upon us, Nietzsche encourages us to create our own values, to assert our own will, and to live authentically. The self, in Nietzsche's view, is not something that is shaped by society, but something that is actively created through the process of self-overcoming. By embracing our natural instincts, rejecting societal constraints, and creating our own path, we can achieve true freedom and personal fulfillment. Friedrich Nietzsche's concept of freedom is one of the most provocative and revolutionary aspects of his philosophy. Unlike the conventional understanding of freedom as mere liberty to act according to one's desires, Nietzsche's conception of freedom is much more profound and demanding. To Nietzsche, true freedom is not just the absence of restrictions or the ability to choose between alternatives. It is the capacity to transcend the limits imposed by society and, more crucially, by the individual's own internalized beliefs and fears. This type of freedom is not a passive state but an active process of self-overcoming, where individuals are not simply free from external constraints, but also free to assert their own will, create their own values, and live in alignment with those values without being shackled by societal expectations. At its core, Nietzsche's idea of freedom is a rejection of the traditional moral and social systems that limit personal potential. In conventional societies, individuals are taught to abide by a set of rules and moral standards that are handed down from various authorities: religion, culture, politics, and even family. These systems tend to promote certain virtues and behaviors that, while they may serve to maintain social order, often suppress the natural instincts and desires that drive human beings toward greatness, creativity, and self-actualization. For Nietzsche, freedom is not simply a matter of being free to act, it is about being free from these constraints. Free from the inherited values that society has placed upon us, and free to create our own path in life. This vision of freedom challenges the commonly held notion of freedom as merely the right to pursue one's desires or ambitions. For Nietzsche, the pursuit of individual desires, when restricted by societal norms, is not true freedom. Rather, true freedom is the ability to overcome those norms and create a life based on one's own values, desires, and will. In essence, Nietzsche suggests that freedom is not merely the right to act, but the capacity to define one's existence, to choose one's own values, and to live according to those values without being controlled by the expectations of others. This form of freedom is what Nietzsche calls the will to power. The internal drive that enables individuals to assert their existence in the world and reshape it in their own image. To illustrate this, consider the example of someone pursuing a career path that aligns with their passion and personal values rather than choosing a career path that society deems prestigious or financially rewarding. In today's world, societal expectations often drive individuals to pursue careers in law, medicine, or business fields that offer stability and social approval. However, for someone who is driven by a deep passion for the arts or social justice, the freedom Nietzsche speaks of would involve rejecting the pressures to conform to these conventional career paths and instead forging a path that is in alignment with their authentic self. The ability to follow this path, despite societal resistance or judgment, is a form of freedom, one that is rooted in the individual's will to power and their courage to defy the expectations placed upon them. Nietzsche's concept of freedom also involves overcoming the internal constraints that limit personal growth. While society places external pressures on individuals to conform to a set of values, people also internalize these pressures and allow them to shape their self-identity. For Nietzsche, freedom is the ability to break free from these internalized values, the slave morality that encourages meekness, humility, and submission, and to embrace one's own instincts, desires, and potential. The individual must confront their own fears, insecurities, and doubts, many of which are a result of societal conditioning. In order to achieve true freedom, Nietzsche's call to freedom is not just a call to break free from society's restrictions, but also from the self-imposed limitations that prevent people from reaching their fullest potential. In this context, Nietzsche's freedom is deeply tied to the concept of the Übermensch, or Overman. The Ubermensch is a figure who has transcended both the moral constraints of society and the limitations of their own psyche. This individual is not bound by traditional morality, social conventions, or external expectations. Instead, the Übermensch creates their own values and lives according to them. This figure is an embodiment of freedom, representing the ultimate realization of human potential. The Übermensch does not ask for permission to live authentically, they do not seek validation from others, nor do they fear the judgments of society. Instead, they live according to their own desires and values, fully embracing the will to power as their driving force. The concept of the Ubermensch is not a blueprint for a specific kind of life but an ideal that represents the ultimate form of individual freedom, the ability to create one's life from the ground up, without being limited by the constructs of society or internalized values. To achieve this kind of freedom, Nietzsche believed that individuals must engage in a process of constant self-overcoming. This process involves confronting and rejecting the constraints that society has placed on the individual, as well as the internalized fears and moral codes that prevent the individual from fully expressing their power. This is not an easy task, as it requires immense courage and self-awareness. Many people resist freedom because it involves stepping into the unknown, rejecting familiar and comfortable values, and facing the discomfort that comes with being true to oneself. Nietzsche understood that freedom is not the absence of struggle, but the ability to rise above struggle, to face life's challenges head-on and create meaning from them. An important element of Nietzsche's philosophy is the idea that freedom is not an inherent right but something that must be actively created. In other words, freedom is not simply a condition that exists outside of us, but something that arises from within, through the choices we make and the actions we take. Nietzsche's notion of freedom requires individuals to take full responsibility for their lives and to actively shape their existence. It involves rejecting passivity and embracing the courage to create a life that reflects one's true self. For Nietzsche, freedom is a creative act, one that involves using our will to power to transform ourselves and the world around us. This process of creating one's own values is not just an intellectual exercise, it is a deeply emotional and existential act. To live freely, according to Nietzsche, is to be true to one's own desires and instincts, and to act with the confidence that one's values are valid, even in the face of societal opposition. This is why Nietzsche viewed the creation of values as one of the highest forms of freedom. It is an act of self-assertion, an affirmation of one's power to shape the world in their own image. To Nietzsche, The act of creating values is a rejection of nihilism and a challenge to the forces that seek to limit human potential. A practical example of Nietzsche's philosophy of freedom can be seen in the way artists, entrepreneurs, and thinkers break free from societal constraints to create something new. Think of someone like Steve Jobs, whose vision of technology and design fundamentally transformed the way we interact with the world. Jobs was not content to follow the rules of the existing technological world. He challenged them, rejected the conventional wisdom, and created his own path. In doing so, he not only reshaped the tech industry but also embodied Nietzsche's ideal of the Ubermensch, an individual who creates their own values and lives freely according to their vision. The ultimate form of freedom, for Nietzsche, is the ability to live authentically, to act in accordance with one's deepest desires and values, without being constrained by the values imposed by society or internalized fears. This kind of freedom is not for the faint of heart. It requires immense strength, courage, and the willingness to face adversity. But for those who are willing to embrace it, Nietzsche's vision of freedom offers a path to personal greatness, creativity, and self-empowerment. It is a freedom that goes beyond mere independence or autonomy. It is a freedom that is rooted in the ability to create, shape, and live according to one's own values, free from the constraints of social norms and conventional morality. In the modern world, where societal pressures to conform are stronger than ever, Nietzsche's philosophy of freedom remains as relevant as it was in his time. The challenge, then, is for individuals to look beyond the surface level of societal expectations and discover the deeper, more authentic desires and values that lie within. True freedom, according to Nietzsche, is the ability to recognize and act on these desires, to transcend the limits that society has placed on us, and to live a life that is truly our own. This, ultimately, is the freedom that Nietzsche invites us to embrace, the freedom to become the fullest, most authentic version of ourselves. Friedrich Nietzsche's concept of the Übermensch, often translated as Overman or Superman, represents one of the most revolutionary and complex ideas in his philosophy. The Übermensch is not merely a figure of strength or superiority, but a profound embodiment of freedom, self-realization, and transcendence. In Nietzsche's thought, the Ubermensch serves as the ideal model for what it means to live authentically, to break free from the constraints imposed by society, tradition, and morality, and to create one's own values. In the context of Nietzsche's ideas about the self and freedom, the Ubermensch represents the ultimate fusion of personal autonomy and creative expression. An individual who fully embraces their instincts and desires without being constrained by external norms. At the core of the Ubermensch is the idea of absolute freedom, the freedom to shape one's own destiny, to create values from within, and to live authentically, free from the moral codes and social expectations that restrict the individual's potential. Unlike the common understanding of freedom as merely the absence of external restrictions, Nietzsche's vision of freedom is more radical. It is the freedom to reject inherited values, to step beyond the conventional norms that govern societal life, and to live according to one's own will and desires. The Ubermensch is not bound by traditional notions of morality, religion, or social order. Instead, this individual creates a new set of values, guided by their inner will, and lives their life according to these self-constructed ideals. This process is not simply an act of rebellion against society, but an act of profound creativity and self-overcoming. Nietzsche's idea of the Ubermensch also challenges the notion of morality as something universally applicable. Traditional moral values, particularly those rooted in religion and societal norms, often tell people how to behave, what is good, and what is bad. These values, Nietzsche argued, often stifle the individual's natural instincts and suppress the will to power, the drive to assert oneself, to grow, and to create. The Ubermensch rejects these external moral frameworks and instead creates their own system of values, based on their personal desires, instincts, and experiences. This ability to create one's own values is central to Nietzsche's idea of freedom, as it allows the individual to live according to their authentic self, without being restricted by societal expectations or inherited moral codes. One of the most compelling aspects of the Ubermensch is that this figure represents not just a break from societal norms but an ongoing process of self-overcoming. The Ubermensch is not a static or fixed figure, rather, It is an ideal that embodies the constant evolution and transformation of the individual. In Nietzsche's philosophy, the Übermensch is not a goal to be achieved in a single moment or a state to be reached once and for all. Instead, the Übermensch represents the continual process of self-creation and self-overcoming, an individual who is constantly evolving, challenging themselves, and striving to transcend their own limitations. The Übermensch is a symbol of human potential that is always in motion, always seeking to break free from the constraints of the past and to forge a new, more powerful identity. This concept of self-overcoming is crucial to Nietzsche's understanding of freedom. True freedom, in Nietzsche's view, is not the mere absence of external constraints, but the active process of transcending one's limitations, both internal and external. To be free, according to Nietzsche, is to constantly challenge oneself, to push beyond one's current self, and to create a life that is not determined by the expectations of others, but by one's own will and creativity. The Übermensch is the embodiment of this freedom, an individual who does not settle for mediocrity or passivity but who continually strives to become more, to achieve greatness, and to live authentically. Nietzsche's emphasis on self-overcoming and the creation of new values can be understood as a rejection of stagnation and conformity. In a world where people are often taught to accept the values they inherit from their culture, family, or religion, Nietzsche calls for the individual to actively reject these imposed values and to create their own. The Übermensch is someone who challenges the status quo, who refuses to live according to the norms of society, and who instead creates a life based on their own unique vision of the world. This is not an easy path. It requires great strength and courage to confront the expectations of others and to live in a way that is radically different from the norms of society. But for Nietzsche, this is the path to true freedom, freedom from the constraints of conventional morality, freedom to create new values, and freedom to live authentically. A powerful example of the Übermensch in action can be found in the lives of individuals who have radically transformed their industries or fields by rejecting conventional wisdom and creating something entirely new. Think of innovators like Steve Jobs or Elon Musk. Individuals who did not simply accept the status quo in their respective fields but who sought to break free from existing limitations and to create something revolutionary. Jobs, for instance, was not content to simply follow the path laid out by previous technology companies. Instead, he redefined what technology could be and how it could shape human experience. His work with Apple was not just about building products, it was about creating a new vision for what technology could do for people. And he did so by rejecting conventional ideas about what technology should look like. This kind of radical innovation, this ability to create new values and shape the future according to one's own vision, is the embodiment of Nietzsche's Übermensch. But the Übermensch is not just about revolutionizing industries or breaking through social conventions in the realm of business and technology. Nietzsche's ideal can be applied to any area of life, from the arts to personal relationships. In the realm of art, the Übermensch is the artist who creates not based on the expectations of the art world but who breaks free from traditional styles and conventions to create something new. Something that reflects their inner world and vision. This artist is not concerned with being accepted by critics or the public. Instead, they are driven by an inner imperative to create and express themselves authentically. To achieve the ideal of the Übermensch, Nietzsche believed that individuals must overcome their fear of judgment, rejection, and failure. This involves a deep confrontation with the self-acknowledging one's weaknesses, limitations, and fears and then rising above them. The Übermensch is an individual who refuses to be controlled by the fear of what others think or the pressures of society. Instead, they embrace their own potential and are willing to take risks, challenge conventions, and fail in order to grow. This process of self-overcoming is ongoing. It is a continuous struggle to become better, stronger, and more authentic. Nietzsche's concept of the Übermensch offers a radical vision for human freedom and self-actualization. Rather than viewing freedom as simply the ability to do whatever one wants, Nietzsche's freedom is about the creation of an authentic life, one that is not dictated by external forces but by the individual's will to power. The Übermensch represents the ultimate realization of this freedom. As an individual who has transcended societal norms, rejected inherited values, and created a life that is uniquely their own. To become the Übermensch is to fully embrace one's potential, to constantly evolve and grow, and to live with courage, authenticity, and strength. In the context of modern society, the Übermensch serves as a challenge to the conformity and mediocrity that often characterize contemporary life. Nietzsche's vision invites us to question the norms that define our existence, to create our own values, and to strive for greatness in a world that often values safety, stability, and predictability over innovation and individuality. The Ubermensch is not an unattainable ideal but a call to action, urging each of us to transcend our limitations and to live fully, boldly, and authentically. Through the continual process of self-overcoming, we can all move toward this ideal and, in doing so, achieve a level of freedom and self-expression that is both powerful and liberating. In Nietzsche's philosophy, suffering is not an unfortunate consequence of life, nor is it something to be avoided. Instead, suffering plays a crucial role in the individual's quest for freedom and self-realization. Nietzsche challenges the conventional idea that happiness and ease are the ultimate goals in life. Instead, he proposes that true freedom, and by extension, true personal growth, requires the ability to embrace and even seek out suffering. In his view, suffering is not just an inevitable part of life but a transformative force that shapes the self, helping individuals transcend their limitations and create new values. Nietzsche's stance on suffering can be understood within the broader framework of his concept of self-overcoming. To overcome oneself, to rise above the constraints imposed by society and by one's own limiting beliefs, involves a continuous process of struggle and resistance. This struggle is not just external, in the form of societal pressures or hardships, but internal as well, dealing with our own fears, doubts, and limitations. In Nietzsche's vision, these struggles, while painful, are necessary for growth. Suffering, therefore, is an integral part of the human experience, a part of the journey toward personal freedom and the creation of meaning in one's life. At the heart of Nietzsche's view on suffering is the belief that it is not suffering itself that holds value but the way in which the individual responds to it. Many people, Nietzsche observed, seek to avoid suffering at all costs. This desire for comfort and security leads them to conform to the expectations of society, suppress their desires, and live lives that are dictated by the norms and moral codes around them. According to Nietzsche, this avoidance of suffering results in stagnation, a life of mediocrity, without the kind of personal growth that comes from confronting and overcoming hardship. Nietzsche, on the other hand, emphasizes that suffering, when faced head-on, can be a powerful catalyst for transformation. The experience of suffering challenges the individual, pushing them to confront their limitations, reassess their values, and forge a new path forward. It is in the depths of hardship that individuals often find their strength, resilience, and creativity. Nietzsche's idea of becoming who you are can only be realized through a process that involves facing and overcoming suffering, rather than avoiding it. In this way, suffering becomes a vital force in the formation of a strong, independent self. Consider the process of personal growth that many individuals experience after overcoming significant personal challenges. Take, for example, someone who has suffered a major failure, such as the collapse of a business or the end of a significant relationship. While the immediate experience of failure and heartbreak is painful, many individuals eventually emerge from such experiences with greater clarity, resilience, and a deeper understanding of themselves. Nietzsche would argue that it is this suffering that propels the individual towards self-discovery and self-empowerment. Without this struggle, there is no growth, no chance for the individual to transcend their former self and create new values. The process of creating one's own values is, in Nietzsche's view, a painful one. To create something new, something authentic, is to reject the old, to break away from the inherited beliefs and expectations of society. This rejection can be uncomfortable because it often involves going against the grain of societal norms and confronting personal fears. Nietzsche famously declared, "What does not kill me makes me stronger," a sentiment that encapsulates his view of suffering as a necessary and even life-affirming force. Suffering, in this sense, is not to be feared but embraced as a crucial part of the process of self-creation. Nietzsche's philosophy of suffering challenges the conventional wisdom that seeks to eliminate pain and hardship from our lives. Instead of viewing suffering as a negative experience to be avoided, Nietzsche asks us to reconsider its role in our personal development. He argues that individuals who are unwilling to face suffering are not living fully, but are merely existing within the confines of societal expectations, passively accepting the values imposed on them by others. True freedom, Nietzsche suggests, lies in the ability to face suffering, to transform it, and to use it as a means of creating a life that is uniquely one's own. One of the most striking aspects of Nietzsche's approach to suffering is his assertion that it is only by confronting pain and hardship that we can experience true freedom. In the traditional sense, freedom is often understood as the absence of obstacles, the ability to do whatever one desires without interference. But for Nietzsche, freedom is something much deeper. It is the power to shape one's own existence, to create one's own values, and to live authentically according to one's inner will. This kind of freedom is not passive, it is an active process that requires strength, courage, and the willingness to face adversity head-on. It is through suffering, Nietzsche argues, that we gain the strength and clarity necessary to live a life that is truly free. Nietzsche's conception of freedom is not about escaping suffering or avoiding hardship, but rather about using these experiences to transform oneself. In a sense, Nietzsche's philosophy offers a blueprint for personal liberation, a guide for how to use suffering as a tool for self-empowerment. It is in the crucible of hardship that the individual is forged, and through this process, they gain the freedom to live according to their own desires and values, unshackled by the constraints of society. This idea can be seen in the lives of many successful individuals who have turned personal tragedy or failure into a source of strength and motivation. For example, consider the story of Thomas Edison, who faced repeated failures in his pursuit of inventing the electric light bulb. Rather than being defeated by these failures, Edison used them as stepping stones, each failure bringing him closer to success. His perseverance in the face of repeated hardship demonstrates Nietzsche's view that suffering, when embraced and overcome, can lead to innovation and personal growth. Edison's journey toward inventing the light bulb is not just a story of scientific achievement but also a testament to the power of self-overcoming, the ability to push through pain, disappointment, and failure to create something new and life-changing. Nietzsche's insistence that suffering is an essential component of personal freedom challenges the modern tendency to avoid discomfort and seek constant pleasure or security. In a society that often values comfort above all else, Nietzsche's message can seem radical. Yet, his ideas have profound implications for how we think about growth, success, and authenticity. In Nietzsche's view, it is not through the avoidance of suffering that we become free, but through our willingness to confront it, learn from it, and use it as a tool for self-transformation. This idea of embracing suffering as part of the journey toward freedom is particularly relevant in today's world, where many people seek to avoid discomfort at all costs. Whether through consumerism, social media, or the pursuit of material success, there is a pervasive cultural tendency to avoid pain and hardship. Nietzsche's philosophy, however, offers a radically different approach, a challenge to embrace suffering as a natural and necessary part of life. By doing so, individuals can achieve a deeper form of freedom, one that is not based on the absence of pain but on the strength and resilience gained through it. In practical terms, Nietzsche's view on suffering and freedom invites individuals to confront their fears, doubts, and challenges, rather than running from them. It calls for a shift in mindset, from seeing suffering as something to be avoided to recognizing it as an opportunity for growth and self-empowerment. Whether it is the suffering that comes from failure, rejection, or personal loss, Nietzsche's philosophy encourages us to face these experiences with courage, to learn from them, and to use them to create a life that is truly our own. Nietzsche's philosophy is ultimately about the cultivation of inner strength and the rejection of external limitations. True freedom, for Nietzsche, is not about escaping pain, but about embracing the challenges of life and using them to forge a more authentic and powerful existence. It is only by facing suffering, rather than avoiding it, that we can achieve the kind of freedom that Nietzsche envisions, freedom that is not based on comfort or ease, but on the power to create and live a life that is true to our deepest desires and instincts. Friedrich Nietzsche's exploration of the self, particularly within the context of nature and civilization, offers a nuanced and provocative view on how individuals navigate the tension between their innate instincts and the structures imposed by modern society. While Nietzsche does not advocate for the complete rejection of civilization, He emphasizes the necessity of maintaining a balance between the natural self and the constraints placed upon individuals by societal norms. This balance is essential for personal growth, freedom, and the preservation of what he deems the true essence of human nature. Civilization, as Nietzsche saw it, is both a source of progress and a potential threat to the individual's authentic self. On the one hand, civilization provides the infrastructure for intellectual, artistic, and technological advancements. It offers opportunities for personal development and collective improvement. On the other hand, the very structures that make up civilization, such as organized religion, political systems, and social expectations, can impose restrictions on individual freedom, creativity, and self-expression. Nietzsche's philosophy thus calls for a delicate balancing act. Individuals must engage with the benefits of civilization while simultaneously resisting its tendency to suppress their natural instincts and desires. In Nietzsche's view, the self is not something fixed or determined by society, rather, it is something dynamic and continuously created through a process of self-overcoming. The ideal individual, according to Nietzsche, is one who does not simply conform to societal norms or succumb to the pressures of civilization, but who instead uses the tools and opportunities provided by civilization to strengthen their innate capacities. The self, in Nietzsche's framework, is a creative force, one that should not be stifled by societal expectations but should instead be allowed to flourish and evolve. Civilization provides many advantages: artistic expression, intellectual discourse, scientific progress, and opportunities for social cooperation. Yet, Nietzsche recognized that these advancements often come at a cost. As civilization develops, it tends to prioritize order, stability, and conformity, often at the expense of personal freedom and individuality. The moral systems that arise within civilized societies, especially those rooted in religious or utilitarian traditions, promote virtues such as meekness, self-sacrifice, and obedience. These values, while beneficial for the maintenance of social order, can have a stultifying effect on the individual, dulling the strength of personal instincts and suppressing the will to power, the fundamental drive for growth and self-assertion that Nietzsche saw as essential to human flourishing. For Nietzsche, when civilization dominates the individual too much, the result is a weakening of the self. The more society imposes its values, the more the individual is conditioned to suppress their natural impulses and conform to societal expectations. This suppression, according to Nietzsche, leads to a kind of decadence, a state in which individuals become passive, complacent, and disconnected from their true desires and instincts. In this state, the individual no longer creates their own values but instead lives according to the values imposed by others. The self, in this scenario, becomes weak, constrained by societal norms, and unable to fully express its potential. A key aspect of Nietzsche's philosophy is the idea of self-creation. The individual, in Nietzsche's view, must not simply conform to societal norms or internalize the values handed down by tradition but must actively create and assert their own values. The self is not something that is passively received or given. It is something that is actively formed and shaped through the individual's choices, actions, and will. Nietzsche's ideal is a self that does not succumb to the pressures of civilization but instead uses the tools and opportunities civilization provides to express its true nature. The tension between nature and civilization becomes particularly apparent when we examine the ways in which modern society demands conformity. For example, consider the modern education system. In many societies, the educational process encourages individuals to follow a standardized path, promoting success based on academic achievement, social conformity, and career stability. While these objectives may have practical value, they often come at the expense of personal exploration, creativity, and the development of individual talents and desires. Students are often taught to value external rewards such as grades, approval from authority figures, or a stable job over internal fulfillment and self-expression. The result is that many individuals are left disconnected from their true desires, pursuing careers or lifestyles that they believe are expected of them rather than those that genuinely resonate with their inner selves. Nietzsche would argue that this kind of societal pressure stifles the development of the self. The individual is taught to conform to a system of external rewards and expectations, rather than cultivating their own sense of purpose and direction. The emphasis on societal conformity over personal autonomy leads to a culture where individuality is sacrificed for the sake of collective stability. In this environment, the individual's true nature, their passions, instincts, and unique strengths can become suppressed or even entirely lost. Nietzsche did not see civilization as inherently negative. However, he recognized the benefits that civilization provides, particularly in terms of the opportunities for cultural and intellectual development. What he objected to was the way in which civilization often demands conformity and suppresses individuality in the process. The ideal society, for Nietzsche, is one that provides individuals with the freedom and resources to pursue their own paths, while also encouraging them to challenge the status quo, transcend conventional values, and create new ones. In Nietzsche's view, individuals must find a way to balance their natural instincts with the structures of civilization in a way that allows them to remain true to themselves while also benefiting from the advancements of modern life. This balance does not mean rejecting civilization altogether, but rather using civilization as a tool for self-expression and growth. The self, according to Nietzsche, must remain rooted in its natural instincts and desires, but it must also engage with civilization in a way that allows these instincts to flourish. The individual must be able to navigate the tension between the forces of nature and the constraints of society, using their will to power to assert their identity and create their own values. This process of balancing nature and civilization is exemplified in Nietzsche's concept of the Ubermensch. The Übermensch is the individual who has transcended the limitations of both nature and civilization. This figure does not reject civilization outright but instead uses the tools and opportunities of civilization to strengthen their innate potential. The Übermensch embodies the ideal of a self that is not bound by societal expectations or moral codes but is free to create its own values, pursue its own goals, and live authentically. One could view the Ubermensch as an ideal for navigating the modern world, an individual who is not consumed by the pressures of conformity or the constraints of societal norms but who engages with civilization in a way that allows their natural instincts and creative potential to thrive. In this sense, the Ubermensch represents the possibility of reconciling the tension between nature and civilization, finding a way to live authentically and creatively within the structures of modern life. A modern example of Nietzsche's ideal might be found in artists, entrepreneurs, or thinkers who are not content to simply follow established norms but who instead use the opportunities offered by society to create something entirely new. Think of someone like Steve Jobs, who did not simply accept the existing boundaries of technology or business. Instead, he pushed against those boundaries, creating new values and redefining what was possible in the tech world. Jobs, much like the Ubermensch, used the resources of civilization to push his vision forward, creating a new reality that was entirely his own. In the context of the modern world, the balance between nature and civilization is increasingly important. As society becomes more complex and interconnected, individuals are confronted with more opportunities and more pressures to conform. The challenge, as Nietzsche saw it, is to navigate this complexity in a way that allows us to remain true to our instincts and desires, while also taking advantage of the tools and opportunities that civilization provides. The Ubermensch is not someone who lives outside of society but someone who engages with it in a way that allows them to transcend its limitations and create a life that is truly their own. Nietzsche's philosophy invites us to reconsider our relationship with society and nature. It challenges us to ask whether we are living according to the expectations of others or whether we are creating our own path. It calls for a re-evaluation of the values we have inherited from society, urging us to transcend them and create our own. In doing so, Nietzsche offers a vision of a life that is both authentic and powerful, one that is rooted in the self but not confined by the limits of either nature or civilization. Friedrich Nietzsche's philosophy offers a radical and transformative perspective on individual freedom, self-creation, and the creation of personal values. While his ideas were conceived in the context of the 19th century, their relevance to the modern world is undeniable. Nietzsche's critique of society, his exploration of the self, and his notion of the Übermensch provide us with a framework for understanding how individuals today can navigate a world filled with societal pressures and expectations while still remaining true to themselves. In the modern world, The concept of individualism is often complicated by the overwhelming influence of social norms, media, and collective values. From the moment we are born, we are inundated with messages about who we should be, what we should do, and how we should think. These societal expectations come from many sources: family, education, religion, the workplace, and popular culture. In a world driven by social media, the pressure to conform is even more pronounced. The images we see on our screens, the lifestyles that are celebrated, and the values that are promoted all contribute to a shared narrative that often leaves little room for personal authenticity. Nietzsche's philosophy, however, provides a powerful counterpoint to this. One of the central tenets of his thinking is the idea that individuals must create their own values rather than merely accepting those that society imposes upon them. This process of value creation is not a simple one. It requires introspection, courage, and the willingness to go against the grain. Nietzsche believed that true freedom can only be achieved when individuals are able to overcome societal expectations and live in accordance with their own will and desires. This does not mean rejecting society entirely, but rather rejecting the values imposed by society that do not resonate with the individual's true self. In modern life, the concept of creating your own values can be understood as a call to engage in the process of self-reflection and self-awareness. Nietzsche emphasized that individuals must not passively accept the values handed down by others but must actively question, examine, and reject them when necessary. This process of self-examination and value creation is essential for living authentically and for cultivating a sense of personal freedom. Take, for example, the pressure many young people face today to pursue careers that are deemed prestigious or financially rewarding, such as becoming a doctor, lawyer, or engineer. These professions, while undoubtedly important, may not align with every individual's true passion or desires. Nietzsche would argue that following a path simply because society values it is a form of self-betrayal. True freedom, for Nietzsche, comes when individuals are able to identify their own values and pursue careers that reflect their authentic selves. For some, this might mean choosing a career in the arts, social work, or entrepreneurship fields that may not offer the same external validation but provide a sense of personal fulfillment and alignment with one's values. This brings us to the importance of self-awareness in Nietzsche's philosophy. Self-awareness is the foundation upon which the process of self-creation rests. Without the ability to reflect on who we are, what we want, and why we believe what we believe, we risk living lives dictated by external forces rather than internal desires. In today's world, where external validation through social media likes, followers, and approval often trumps inner satisfaction, Nietzsche's call to become who you are is especially relevant. True freedom, in this sense, requires that we look beyond the expectations of others and focus on understanding our own desires, instincts, and aspirations. However, the quest for personal freedom and self-expression in the modern world is not without its challenges. In a society that often prioritizes conformity and external achievement, individuals are frequently forced to navigate conflicting expectations. For example, many people today find themselves struggling with the pressure to live up to the success stories depicted in the media, stories of wealth, fame, and success that often seem to define what it means to be a valuable or fulfilled person. The rise of social media has only intensified this pressure, as people increasingly measure their worth through likes, shares, and followers, seeking validation from the outside world rather than from within. Nietzsche's philosophy offers a way to break free from this cycle. His notion of will to power emphasizes the importance of asserting one's own identity and pursuing personal goals that are authentic and meaningful, regardless of societal standards. This idea of self-assertion can be particularly liberating in a world where people often feel compelled to follow the crowd or live up to externally imposed ideals. True freedom, according to Nietzsche, lies not in conforming to societal expectations but in creating one's own path, guided by personal values and desires. Living authentically in a society that values conformity, however, is no easy task. There are inevitable challenges and obstacles along the way. Social pressures, family expectations, and the need for economic stability often force individuals to make compromises, sometimes leading them to suppress their true desires. Nietzsche recognized that the journey toward authentic self-expression requires immense courage and resilience. It demands that individuals confront their fears, question the values that have been handed to them, and reject the security of the herd mentality. Consider the example of someone who decides to pursue a career as an artist. Despite societal expectations that they should pursue a more stable or traditional profession, the individual may face criticism from family and friends, or feel the pressure to choose a career that promises financial security. However, the decision to follow one's passion and embrace a life that aligns with personal values, even at the risk of hardship or uncertainty, is a powerful act of self-assertion. This is the kind of freedom that Nietzsche advocates: freedom from the constraints of social norms. Freedom to create and live according to one's authentic desires. One of the key challenges of applying Nietzsche's philosophy in the modern world is overcoming the fear of judgment and rejection. In a society where social approval is highly valued, the fear of standing out or going against the grain can be paralyzing. Nietzsche, however, encourages us to embrace this fear as part of the process of self-creation. The individual who can rise above the fear of judgment and remain true to themselves is the one who achieves the highest form of freedom. The Ubermensch, or Overman, represents this ideal: an individual who creates their own values, lives authentically, and refuses to be swayed by the pressures of society. The modern world is filled with distractions and external pressures that can easily lead us away from our true selves. The constant bombardment of information, the allure of consumerism, and the social pressures to conform make it difficult to cultivate a sense of inner freedom. Nietzsche's philosophy offers a timely reminder that true liberation comes not from external achievements or societal approval but from within. It is about the courage to reject the values that others impose upon us and to create our own path, guided by our deepest desires and instincts. Moreover, Nietzsche's emphasis on the importance of self-awareness and self-creation challenges us to live consciously, to be active participants in our own lives, and to not simply accept the roles that society offers us. It is easy to fall into the trap of living passively, following the rules and expectations that others set for us. But Nietzsche calls for something more. He urges us to take control of our own destiny, to live in a way that reflects our true selves, and to embrace the challenges and discomforts that come with this journey. The ultimate challenge of applying Nietzsche's philosophy to modern life lies in the reconciliation of personal freedom with social responsibility. While Nietzsche advocates for personal autonomy and the rejection of societal constraints, he also acknowledges that we live in a social world and must navigate relationships, responsibilities, and obligations. The key is not to completely reject society or the relationships that we have with others but to assert our own individuality within these frameworks. Nietzsche's philosophy encourages us to engage with the world on our own terms, not as passive recipients of external influence but as active creators of our own lives. In the end, Nietzsche's ideas about self-creation, personal freedom, and authenticity offer valuable insights for anyone seeking to live a more meaningful life in today's complex and often overwhelming world. His call to become who you are remains a powerful invitation to explore our true desires, to create our own values, and to live in a way that reflects our most authentic selves. In a world that often encourages conformity, Nietzsche's philosophy offers a bold vision of how we can assert our individuality, overcome societal pressures, and live with purpose and meaning. In conclusion, the interconnectedness of the self and freedom in Nietzsche's philosophy offers a bold and transformative framework for understanding human existence. At the heart of Nietzsche's thought is the belief that true freedom is not simply the absence of external constraints, but the ability to transcend societal norms and create one's own values. The individual, in Nietzsche's view, must not passively accept the values that society imposes but must actively shape their own life and identity. The self, in this context, is not a static, predefined entity, it is a dynamic, evolving project that requires constant self-overcoming and the courage to challenge the limitations set by both society and one's own inner fears. One of the most compelling ideas in Nietzsche's philosophy is the notion of self-creation. To live freely, an individual must reject the values and expectations that society has prescribed and instead cultivate a set of personal values based on their instincts, desires, and true nature. This is not an easy path. It requires strength, resilience, and a willingness to confront discomfort and fear. Society, with its pressure to conform and its emphasis on collective values, often discourages individuality and self-expression. Nietzsche's philosophy, however, calls for individuals to embrace their authentic selves, to question societal norms, and to live in alignment with their own will. The pursuit of freedom, according to Nietzsche, is not simply about escaping societal constraints but about the ongoing process of self-overcoming. It is the act of continuously striving to become more, to break free from the limitations imposed by others, and to assert one's own values. This process is often difficult, as it requires individuals to confront the fears and doubts that arise when they reject the safety of conformity. However, it is precisely through this struggle that true freedom is realized. By embracing self-overcoming and self-creation, individuals can break free from the constraints of society and live lives that are authentically their own. Nietzsche's philosophy encourages us to examine the ways in which we have been conditioned by society, to confront the values we have inherited, and to create new values that are more in line with our true selves. The journey toward personal freedom requires introspection, the courage to break away from the herd mentality, and the willingness to face the difficulties that arise when we begin to live authentically. This process of self-discovery and self-creation is ongoing and requires constant reflection and adjustment. In the modern world, where social media, consumerism, and conventional norms exert constant pressure, Nietzsche's call for personal freedom is as relevant as ever. The challenge, however, is not just to reject societal values but to replace them with something deeply meaningful and personally significant. This requires a level of introspection that many people may avoid because it forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves. But it is only through this confrontation with our true desires and instincts that we can begin to live lives that are truly fulfilling and free from the restrictions that society often places upon us. Ultimately, Nietzsche's vision of freedom is one that requires us to actively shape our own lives. It is about breaking free from the expectations of others, embracing our authentic selves, and creating a life that reflects our deepest desires and values. The self is not a fixed, predetermined entity. It is a creative force that is always evolving and growing. To live authentically and freely is to continually engage in the process of self-overcoming, rejecting the limitations imposed by society and embracing the power to create and define our own path. Nietzsche's philosophy calls each of us to embark on a journey of self-discovery, to challenge the norms and expectations that govern our lives, and to create a life that reflects our true selves. The path to freedom is not easy, and it requires a willingness to face the discomfort and fear that come with living authentically. But through this process, we can achieve a level of personal power, creativity, and fulfillment that is unmatched by the safety of conformity. Nietzsche's vision of the self and freedom invites us to become the creators of our own lives, to transcend the limitations of society, and to embrace the power that comes from living in accordance with our own values. The journey toward this freedom is not only a path to personal growth but a journey toward becoming the fullest version of ourselves. So, after all this, what does living a truly free life mean? According to Nietzsche, it's about creating your own values, embracing your true desires, and rejecting the societal chains that hold you back. It's about becoming the person you were always meant to be, an individual who doesn't simply follow the norms but instead challenges and transcends them. And remember, this isn't an easy path. It requires strength, courage, and the willingness to confront the discomfort and fear that comes with living authentically. But through that struggle, through those challenges, comes the freedom to live the life you've always wanted. Nietzsche's philosophy offers us a powerful reminder that freedom doesn't just come from external conditions, it comes from within. It's about the continual process of self-overcoming, creating new values, and asserting your will to power. It's about rejecting the easy path of conformity and, instead, embracing the hard but rewarding journey of becoming who you truly are. Now, I want to hear from you. How are you applying Nietzsche's philosophy in your own life? What are the societal expectations you've struggled with? And how can you begin to break free from them? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to know how these ideas are resonating with you. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to hit the like button. Share it with someone who could use a little Nietzsche-inspired freedom in their life. And subscribe to stay updated on future content. And remember, you can always support the channel by using the Super Thanks feature below. Every contribution helps bring more in-depth discussions like this one to life. Thank you for watching. And remember, true freedom is not about escaping society entirely, it's about living in a way that's true to yourself. Keep questioning, keep creating, and most importantly, keep living authentically. See you in the next video.